Okie dokie. So, last part for this section, we're going to talk a little bit about this right here. Yes, the circulatory system. So, we've already talked about the skin, we've talked about the senses. We're going to end this section with the circulatory system, which obviously has to do with the heart and the blood vessels and, yeah, lots of stuff. So, before we get into that, there are two types of circulatory systems when we talk about basically animals and as a whole. We have open versus closed. So an open circulatory system would be something like in maybe a cricket or a grasshopper, where basically you have the heart, but everything's kind of open-ended. Nothing's closed. It's not a circular kind of a cycle. Where in a closed system, such as something that we have a heart, we have all these blood vessels, but then blood makes its way back to the heart. So it's this closed system, kind of like a circuit when you think of an open circuit versus a closed circuit. And typically, closed circulatory systems are a lot more advanced. Okay, there's a lot more things that can take place with the closed circuit. So that's one thing that I really wanted to kind of bring to your attention, because you'll see that in your lovely lesson. So now, on to the circulatory system as a whole. The function consists of the heart and the network of blood vessels. It moves blood through the body. Obviously, those are the most easy to figure out kind of functions of the circulatory system. There's a lot more to it, because when we think about why the blood is circulating through our body is because we need oxygen to all different parts of our bodies. All trillions of our cells need oxygen in order to survive and continue doing what they're doing. So obviously really important that blood is constantly being oxygenized via the lungs, and we'll talk about that, but pumped throughout the body as well, okay? So let's talk a little bit about blood, because obviously blood is a pretty important component of the circulatory system. So blood is a tissue. The reason why it's a tissue is it's made up of more than one type of cell, okay? So blood actually is comprised of many different things, okay? So let's talk about these. The red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin, that's what binds to oxygen. White blood cells, platelets, and plasma. So all of these different things. Now when you take a look at this is what we call the hematocrit. The hematocrit is basically the composition of blood, what makes up what percentage. So actually they can do this. They take a blood sample and they put it in this vial, and basically they'll put it in this machine called a centrifuge, which spins the blood really fast, and as it spins, it separates these different components. Well, obviously the heaviest solids are the red blood cells, so they're going to end up at the bottom. So 45% of your blood is red blood cells. Less than 1% makes up your white blood cells and your platelets. And then 55% makes up your plasma. Plasma is the liquid portion of blood, okay? So obviously you can see, that really a majority of the blood is actually the liquid portion, okay? Your white blood cells typically fight off infection. Your platelets help in blood clotting. Your red blood cells obviously distribute the oxygen and then take carbon dioxide back to be exhaled out. So basically that exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is huge with the red blood cells. So the function of blood, which we've kind of touched on, distributes oxygen to all cells. And then it carries carbon dioxide away from the cells in order to be disposed of. Because your body needs the oxygen, but it does not need carbon dioxide. That's a waste product. So your blood can take it back to where it can be expelled from the lungs, okay? The heart. Now, I could spend endless hours talking about the heart because there's so much to it. But I am going to try and go through this quick enough, but yet deep enough so that you guys understand what's going on. So obviously the heart is the organ that actually pumps the blood through the body. Nada, right? Nadoy. But okay, a little bit more intense. It's not just that it pumps, there's a specific way that it pumps and specific directions that it goes. So the heart, our heart in particular, has 4 chambers. So let's talk about this in detail. Now notice how the left side of the heart is on the right side of what you're looking at. Well, it's because anytime you're looking at a heart, you're actually looking at it as if it was inside of you, okay? So you have to know that the right side to us is really the left side of the heart and vice versa, okay? So the right side of the heart is depicted in blue because anytime you have blood going into the right side of the heart, it's deoxygenated. Now please know that blood is not blue. I'm sure your elementary school teachers told you that. Oh my gosh, your blood is blue if it's deoxygenated or in the veins. No, your veins look blue because of the lighting and because it's kind of a translucent, so the way the light reflects makes it look blue. Now your blood, your deoxygenated blood is kind of a dark, dark maroon, okay? So it's not blue, but we depict it as deoxygenated blue. So just know that that's kind of a wives' tale. The cool thing is if you cut yourself, you'll notice that when the blood does hit the air, it's becoming oxygenated. It'll start to look brighter. So as soon as you cut yourself, you can, take note. Be like, oh, so your blood is really dark, okay? And then as it starts to hit the air, it's going to turn a little bit brighter because the oxygen is hitting it from the air, okay? All right, so the blood is going to come in through the right atrium through this superior and inferior vena cava. So all of the blood that's deoxygenated comes back to the heart through these two huge veins, okay? They empty into the right atrium. The right atrium is pretty much the first chamber that the blood's going to reach. It's going to go through this valve called the tricuspid, okay, into the right ventricle. Did I say that right? Yes. Yes. I think. For some reason I'm getting my valves all mixed up for some reason. Okay, so it's going to go into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, which is typically a larger chamber, okay, it's going to be pumped out of this pulmonary semilunar valve, okay? And once it gets pumped out of there, you'll notice you can't see, but each of these tubes leads to the lungs. Well, in the lungs, that's where oxygen is basically exchanged for CO2. So you're going to grab oxygen, the blood is going to get oxygen from the lungs, and the right and the left lung, and then it's going to bring it back through the pulmonary veins. I keep forgetting what I'm talking about right now. So the pulmonary veins are going to bring that back into this left atrium. So the atrias are the upper chambers of the heart. It's going to go through this nice valve right here, the left AV valve, okay, atrioventricular valve, and it's going to go into the largest chamber of the heart, which is the left ventricle. Okay, so from the left ventricle, it's going to be pushed out through this aortic semilunar valve, out through the aorta, and out to the rest of your body, okay? And it's going to go all through your body, and then it's going to be, distributing all the oxygen and basically now picking up carbon dioxide and coming back through the superior and the inferior vena cava into the right atrium, out, okay, back into the left atrium from the lungs. Now it's oxygenated, so that's why it's depicted as red, through this valve, out through the aorta to the rest of the body, okay? So I know that there's a lot of information I just told you, but it's very important that you kind of maybe stop and comprehend that a little bit, okay? And you'll read that in your lesson as well. So know the blood flow through the heart, okay? Understand why it's depicted as blue and red, deoxygenated versus oxygenated. It obviously is going to get the oxygen from the lungs, okay? All right, so let's move on. I know that's a lot to take in. Hopefully someday you guys can take an anatomy class, and we'll talk more and more and more about this, and you'll have it down like no other. Okay, so the beating of the heart. The reason why our heart beats is because it has this natural pacemaker, okay? It's called the sinoatrial node, or the SA node, and it's this group of cells that basically causes the heart to beat, that is basically located near the right atrium, okay? So it's very important that that pacemaker is keeping the heart beating the way it should. Now sometimes you'll know maybe some of your grandparents or some people you've known where their pacemaker stops working and they have to get an artificial pacemaker. So you can see this right here. It actually just sits over the right atrium where the pacemaker should be, and it allows that heart to beat again in a natural, the way it's supposed to. So I knew this guy. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. He passed away, but he was kind of like my second grandpa. And he was having heart trouble, and he would, all of a sudden, it was like, his heart would start beating really fast or really slow, so they had to give him a pacemaker. So not only did they give him a pacemaker, sometimes his heart would beat so slowly that they had actually put like kind of this defibrillator on his heart, So when his heart would start to slow down a little bit, it would almost like jolt him, like how those defibs would, do, you see in the movies when they're trying to revive somebody. Well, it would give his heart a little jolt. So it was kind of funny because not only had a pacemaker, he had one of those things. And it one time was like malfunctioning, and it would jolt him, and he'd throw things, and we'd kind of laugh because he was laughing too, but it was crazy because obviously it was making his heart do some crazy things. So he had to go and get that repaired. But anyways, that's what happens if your heart is not working the way it should. You obviously have to get things repaired. Okay, so what causes the sound of the heart? It's called the lub-dub. That's the sound it makes. Lub-dub, lub-dub. And what actually causes that is the closing of the valves. So you have 4 valves total. You have the tricuspid, you have the bicuspid, or we also call this the right AV valve and the left AV valve, okay? And then you have these semilunar valves, or we call it the aortic and the pulmonary, okay? So the cuspid valves, or the AV valves, close at the same time. So believe it or not, both sides of your heart are actually pumping at the same time. So when these valves close together, that's the sound of the lub. And then the other sound, the dub sound, comes from the closing of these semilunar valves. So the valves kind of work together in pairs. So those AV, or the cuspid valves, close up, and you'll hear the lub, and then the dub sound, obviously, from these two closing, okay? So it's interesting, just a kind of a question to make you think. You obviously, if you use a stethoscope, you can hear your heart, okay, right? But sometimes they'll be listening and put, the stethoscope down here at your wrist, and they'll be listening. Do you think you can hear your heartbeat there? Is that what they're listening for? No, because obviously it's too far away to hear those valves closing. But they are listening for other things. Okay, you can hear blood flow through here. You just can't hear the beating. You can feel the pulse, but that's not the same as the beating, and you're not going to hear the beating. But the doctors typically are listening for blood flow and any obstructions down here. Okay, so that's what makes the sound. Now, when we talk about blood vessels, okay, there are many different blood vessels. You have arteries, and those are the largest blood vessels that carry oxygenated blood. Then you have arterioles that are a little bit smaller arteries. Then you have the tiniest blood vessels called capillaries. Capillaries can only allow one blood cell through at a time, okay? So one red blood cell can fit through single file. They're tiny, tiny, microscopic, and there's tons of them. And then again, and I'm going to go through these diagrams real quick, but once you go through the capillaries, then you're distributing the oxygen. So now that blood moves into venules, which are kind of small veins, but now it's deoxygenated blood, into larger veins, which then takes the blood back to the heart. So that's what kind of this diagram is showing. So let's start over here. This is, the left side of the heart. The left side is pumping oxygenated blood out of the heart, okay, through that aorta. And some of that blood's going to go to the lungs, some of that blood's going to go to the upper parts of the body, like the brain, and then down to the lower parts of the body, okay? So it's going to distribute all of this oxygen as it goes along its way. And it reaches these capillaries in many different places, okay? All these tiny little blood vessels are the capillaries. Well, that's where that oxygen exchange occurs. So now you've given off the oxygen, and now you have deoxygenated blood. So here's the deoxygenated blood coming from the brain, from the lungs, from the liver, from the kidneys, from the lower extremities, and it all files back into the right side of the heart, okay? So that's what I wanted you guys to kind of get out of that. Here is the structure of arteries versus veins. Your arteries are very thick, okay? Arteries have to withstand a lot of pressure because basically when you think about it, all of these arteries are coming directly from the heart. There's a lot of pressure. I mean, your heart is so powerful. You guys would be amazed. It's one of the strongest muscles in your body. It's pumping blood. So all of these arteries have to withstand a lot of pressure. So there's thickness to these arteries. There's a muscular layer that also causes a slight contraction, but it has to withstand a lot of pressure. The veins, on the other hand, still have a thin layer of muscle, but there's no constriction, or not a lot of pressure that's has to be withstood in these veins, because think about it. Your blood has already gone to all these different parts. Now your blood is in the veins, and it's lost a lot of that pressure along the way. So it's not like it has to withstand anything. So that's a big thing that I want you guys to understand, the difference between arteries and veins. They still have the same layers. They still have three, similar layers, a muscle layer, kind of a connective layer, and so forth, but they vary in thickness. Also, veins actually have what we call like one-way valves. So I'm not sure if I have a picture of this. No, I do not, but I want to tell you guys about this. So veins have valves because think about it, there's very little pressure, and especially from the lower extremities, you have to get all that blood all the way back up to your heart, okay? So think about in your legs, you're trying to pump, your body's trying to get the blood back up your legs all the way to your heart to get deoxygenated again. And so maybe you've noticed on some people, older people, middle-aged people, that they have lots of those yummy spider-looking varicose veins, okay? Well, what's happening is these valves that are in the veins, they're trying to push that blood up. But sometimes those valves become a little faulty, and they're only one-way valves, okay? So they open up and then they close. Well, if there's a lot of pressure on them, so say you cross your legs a lot or you're standing a lot, those valves have a lot of pressure on them, and they start to kind of open up, okay? So blood starts to pool right in that area where that valve is not closed all the way, and that's what causes varicose veins, okay? But typically those valves are shut, and they kind of keep helping to move that blood back up to the heart. Okay, so let's talk about blood pressure. So blood pressure obviously is measuring the amount of pressure on your arteries, and that's a very important thing because I can tell whether or not there's some kind of blockage going on, which if there's a blockage in especially the arteries that serve your heart with oxygenated blood, those are called your coronary arteries. They actually give the heart muscle the oxygen it needs, okay? So if there's any blockage of that, then your heart can't get the oxygen, and ultimately then your heart muscle can start to die off, and that's what we call a heart attack. So your blood pressure measures two things: the systole, which is the greatest pressure produced when the heart contracts. That's the top number that you'll see. So like in here, you have 128 over 78, okay? So your systole is the greatest amount of pressure when the heart contracts, okay? The diastole number is the pressure in the arteries when the heart is not contracting. So basically during relaxation, then it measures the pressure again. So that's the bottom number. Here's a good kind of a gauge. Your blood pressure, your ideal blood pressure should be 120 being the highest over 90 or 80, okay? Those are kind of the averages, that if you go above 120 on your systole number, you typically have high blood pressure. So you should have 120 over 80 and below, okay? If you have higher blood pressure, sometimes it's genetic, but there are things to do. You can change your diet. Obviously, exercise really helps. Staying healthy means a good, healthy blood pressure, okay? So I told you guys a little bit about the different, I did have a picture of these. Okay, so the difference between your vessels. Your arteries are much thicker. There's much more pressure in them. So if you sever an artery, you're going to have blood spurting like, those lovely horror films, okay? Because there's so much pressure. So say if you cut an artery, if you saw blood going psh, 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 it's actually splurting with the beat of your heart, okay? That's why it would spurt out. So that's how you would know if you severed an artery. Typically we sever veins. That's why the blood just kind of flows out, okay? So veins contain valves, like I told you. Here's a picture of a vein versus an artery, and here's the valves. So again, here's what a varicose vein looks like. This is obviously a really bad, this is a pretty bad case of varicose veins. But that blood will start to pool because this valve basically becomes faulty, okay? So I kind of went over that. All right, so remember I tried to explain this diagram earlier, so try to follow me. I'm going to do this one more time to hopefully get this in your head. So you have blood that basically is oxygenated in the left side of the body, right? Or the left side of the heart, sorry. So here's the left ventricle being the largest chamber of the heart. It's going to push it out through the aorta. That oxygenated blood is going to go to all different parts in your body. Your lungs need oxygenated blood. Your upper, areas, extremities, your brain, all that stuff is up here. Down here, you have your stomach, your kidneys, and so forth, and then the lower extremities. As it starts to give off that oxygen to all the different cells and body parts, Now it starts to become deoxygenated within those capillaries. Okay, that's where that blood, the transfer, the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide happens. Okay, so then you have deoxygenated blood that now has to make its way up from the lower parts of the body, the kidneys, the liver, every part of the body, even the brain and the upper portions, back to the heart, in the right side of the heart, where it's going to go into the right atrium, to the right ventricle, pumped out to the lungs, where it's going to become oxygenated once again. Okay, come back into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and back out. So it constantly is pumping blood like that. Okay. All right, so no bueno. Let's talk about some of those unfortunate diseases. Hypertension is high blood pressure. So remember, I told you typically anything over 120. They're saying 140 over 90. So it's kind of, if you're over 120, I'd start to look at it. If you're over 140, you really need to get get that checked out. And the bad thing about high blood pressure is in many different things. Okay, first of all, in your brain, if you have high blood pressure, you can start to have brain damage and hemorrhaging, so bleeding in the brain. Your kidneys, you can start to have kidney failure because you're basically putting too much pressure on some of these arteries and veins within the kidney, and so therefore you are popping blood vessels and causing more hemorrhage. And then your heart, if you have high blood pressure, your heart has to work harder to pump blood. So what's going to happen is this heart muscle is going to start to build and grow and grow. Well, that's not good, because look at that. We always think, oh, more muscle, better. But look at how small these chambers have now become because this heart muscle has become so big. Okay, so that's not a good thing. All right, there's hypertension for you. That's high blood pressure. Atherosclerosis. That is hardening of the arteries. Okay, so basically, if you are overweight or you have a poor diet and high blood pressure and high cholesterol, what's happening is that starts to build up in some of those coronary arteries. Again, the coronary arteries are the arteries that feed the heart muscle with oxygen. Okay, well, if these start to build up, look at how narrow this opening becomes. Okay, so that means the less blood can get to those different places, especially the heart. So there's there's a couple of procedures. You can have a bypass surgery, where they basically bypass that blockage, or they can do something called angioplasty, where they take this little kind of a balloon thing and they inflate it, and it basically pushes that cholesterol, and opens up that opening. Now, that's not necessarily a temporary thing, but if you don't change your ways and you still eat the same and you're not exercising, well, that cholesterol is going to just build up again, and then soon you won't be able to do this angioplasty treatment. Okay, so it's really, really important that you guys take care of your bodies, that you guys eat right, you exercise, because you're affecting all parts of your body, and especially if your heart's affected, then that's life-threatening. Okay, all right, and then heart attacks. So again, these coronary arteries that give the actual heart muscle the oxygen it needs, what happens is if you have a blockage, then you don't get the oxygen to parts of that heart muscle. So notice how this is kind of brownish black. Well, that muscle is starting to die because of lack of oxygen, and that's what's causing a heart attack. So it starts to hurt because obviously you're not getting the oxygen and your heart can stop. Okay, so really important that you guys again stay healthy. The scientific term for the heart attack is a myocardial infarction. Okay, so you can blow away some people by saying, "Oh my gosh, I know blah 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 blah," and be like, "Yeah," spread out all these scientific terms. Okay, and some other things: tachycardia versus bradycardia. Tachycardia is if you have an abnormally fast heart rate. So like above 90 beats per minute is considered tachycardia, which can make you feel lightheaded. Obviously, that's not a good thing. And there's definitely things that can bring that heart rate down. Sometimes they'll put you on medicines. Bradycardia is the opposite, a very slow heart rate, where typically you're under 50 beats per minute. Again, you can start to feel a little lightheaded because you're not getting the oxygen maybe to all the parts of your body. So there's ways to correct these, but those are kind of some other things that can go wrong. And then some blood disorders. Of course, there's tons of blood disorders out there. I'll touch on a couple of them. There's different types of anemias, Anemia, what that means is basically a low red blood cell count. There are different types of anemia. Take, for instance, all of us women go through what we call a menstrual anemia every month. Anytime you are menstruating, you're losing a lot of blood, so that automatically puts your body in an anemic state, meaning a low red blood cell. But your body can recoup that, okay? But other things, such as like an iron deficient anemia, sometimes you have to take things. You have to take iron to boost that back up, okay? Another type of anemia is sickle cell anemia. This is typically a genetic disorder and actually found heavily among the African Americans. That it's a really kind of a devastating disease, because what happens is all of a sudden you'll have this bout of sickle cell where your red blood cells turn into this shape. Well, can you imagine in those teeny capillaries that are only, can only fit one cell at a time, that you have these sickled cell shapes going through those capillaries? It starts to cause some internal bleeding. It is very, very painful. So that's another type of anemia, sickle cell anemia. That's where the hemoglobin is basically abnormal and causes that shape to change. Okay? So there's some blood disorders of the red blood cells. You also have leukemia, which is a blood disorder of the white blood cells. Okay? Leukemia typically is just a cancer of the white blood cells. And there's many different types of white blood cells, so there's many different types of leukemia. But here are some of the symptoms. You have weight loss, fever, frequent infections, shortness of breath, muscular weakness. It can be painful, lots of fatigue. So if you start to feel some of these things, you go in and get tested, and they can take a blood sample and find if they see a huge number of white blood cells, they will think, something's wrong. Either your body's trying to fight off an infection or something's wrong. Because typically there's not this many white blood cells in your blood sample. There's a lot more red blood cells than white blood cells. So anytime you have cancer, you typically have an overabundance of those cells. So they would undergo some more tests for that. Okay. And then the EKG, if you ever hear about that, anytime you see, Grey's Anatomy or any of the things that talk about, basically the heartbeat and what's happening. This is the EKG. And all of these different things mean something. And I'm not going to go into this right now, but ultimately it's kind of labeled here. You have atrial depolarization, because the reason why your heart beats is because of all these electrical signals. And so you have the depolarization and repolarization, and that's what allows your heart to beat. But it's interesting that there's so much to this EKG. It measures the changes in electrical potential across the heart. So read through. It talks a little bit more about it in your unit. I'm not going to test you on this heavily, so I just want you guys to know a little bit that each of these things means something. The P, Q, R, S, and T all have a different meaning. All right? The last thing. Sorry, this is a little bit longer because there's a lot of information. So I've got a song that I think is awesome. It's a circulatory rap. You may catch some of the stuff, so listen to this a couple times because it's kind of cool. There's a lot of information in it, but it's well done. Here you go.
Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Capillaries, arteries, and veins, all I'm saying, circulation is the name of the game. Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Capillaries, arteries, and veins, all I'm saying, circulation is the name of the game. Let me start from the heart, cause that seems smart. It's not hard to see, that is the most important part. The first step is to gather up oxygen, sends blood to the lungs, back to the heart again. Next up, we'll talk about the arteries. They take blood from the heart to where it's gotta be. The biggest artery, the main transporter. Right next to the heart, it's called the aorta. Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Capillaries, arteries, and veins, all I'm saying, circulation is the name of the game. Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Capillaries, arteries, and veins, all I'm saying, the circulation is the name of the game. Hey. From the arteries into the capillaries, all your organs and muscles become the beneficiaries of all the oxygen and nutrients they bring through very tiny vessels inside of the body tissue. And now the oxygen's gone, but first we got some carbon dioxide waste to take on, and it's into the vein and back to the heart again. and let the whole cycle start again. Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Capillaries are the reason, veins all the same. The circulation is the name of the game. Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Capillaries are the reason, veins all the same. The circulation is the name of the game. Hey. Taking blood from the heart to the cells and back, dealing with all things vascular and cardiac. Yay, yay.
Okay, obviously I have seen that a little too much. I really like that song though, because it does bring everything in together. So that's it for the circulatory system. You made it through. On to the next system next time. Oh yeah.